I moved to Tennessee in 1996. I played guitar and was in and out of bands that played in the Nashville area. I met a guy and we become good friends. His grandfather was a doctor that retired in the town I live in. At that time, he was living on the property that they owned. I got to know him pretty well, and one day I asked him if anything strange had ever happened to him. He did have some stories and began to tell me some of his experiences. He said when he was in high school, he had a desk up in his room. Above his desk on a wall was a mirror hanging, and on the opposite side of the desk was a window. He said while sitting there doing his homework, he began to see a man outside of the window wearing a hat through the mirror. He would turn around to look, and there would not be anyone there. He said that happened a few different times. Also, while walking out in the woods one day, he witnessed two women in the woods that were wearing clothing from a different era. They just faded away in front of him. What he told me next was probably one of the most chilling stories I've ever heard anyone say to me. He said one day he was out in the woods cleaning up brush and limbs that had fell on the ground. It was the fall time of year. Then he began to hear something rustling through the leaves coming towards him. He just thought it was a small animal like a possum or a raccoon making the rustling sound, walking through the dry leaves on the ground. And he continued with his cleaning. Then he began to hear a voice along with the rustling coming toward him. It was a man's voice in distress calling out for help. It would say, "Help, help me," continually coming closer to him. There was a small bend in the trail, and he began walking toward the sound. As he went around the bend, he saw what was making the noise. It was a Confederate soldier with his legs gone, bleeding and pulling himself through the leaves. He said it scared the heck out of him, and it shocked him at the same time. He said the poor soldier disappeared. He could see the cap and old gray clothes that the fellow was wearing, and the bloody stumps where his legs were bleeding. I will never forget what he told me as long as I live. In 2004, I began a new job, and I was selling cars. It's kind of a fun job, and you meet some interesting people sometimes. On test drives, you talk to the customer to kind of get to know them a bit and see if they really like the car that they are driving. The conversation takes the pressure off the customer, and they begin to open up a little. I remember one test drive in particular one morning. I was letting the customer drive the vehicle, and I was riding passenger. He turned onto a street that I'd never been down before, and at the end of that street was an old house that was older than the rest of them. As he pulled into the driveway to turn around, he said, "That place looks haunted." I replied, "Yes, it does. Have you ever had anything happen to you?" He said, "Yes, he did." He then began to tell me where he lived. He lived on the same road that my other friend lived on that had the Confederate ghost experience. I asked him if he knew my friend, and he did not. He was a bit younger than my friend was too, so they did not go to school together either. He began to tell me one fall evening he was out walking through the woods when he was in high school. He said it was toward the evening time and getting kind of close to dark. He was not doing anything in particular, but just getting out for a nice walk in the evening. He then began to hear something rustling through the leaves coming towards him. He said he thought he heard a voice also and started going toward the sound, which was on the other side of the wooded thicket. Then he froze at what he witnessed in front of him. He said right there in front of him was a Civil War soldier dragging himself by his hands on the ground with no legs and calling for help. I was shocked that his story matched my friend's story almost word for word. I related the exact same story to him that my friend had told me. The most fascinating part of the story is that it was told to me by two individuals that did not know one another that had experienced the exact same encounter, almost word for word, that was 10 years apart. I find that very incredible. Thank you for listening.